And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Wednesday, February 19th. We have a lot to cover on the show today. Before I get into all that, I just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to hit that super chat button in the chat if you want to see me acknowledge any thought or comment you may have throughout the live broadcast. Makes the show more lively, more entertaining between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. We appreciate you guys' viewership each and every day, so any contribution you can make to the show means the world to us as we put out content for you guys each and every day. And also, the other way to help out the show is by going to the link at the bottom of the show segment on the ticker, GSMCPodcast.net. That is GSMCPodcast.net. So let's get into what we are going to discuss for today. So, a variety of different topics. So, we're going to talk about college football. The SEC and the Big Ten, they are meeting. They are discussing a plan to expand the college football playoff. And if their demands are basically not met, they will separate from the rest of college football, from the NCAA. So we'll get into that. We'll also talk about Netflix. Netflix is trying to get a very big piece to the pie when it comes to the NFL. They are trying to get the Sunday afternoon package. So we're going to get into that as well. One of my favorite things to talk about is watching sports on streaming. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about the Blue Jays failing to agree to a long-term extension with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and where he could potentially end up if he doesn't sign with the Blue Jays after this season. So we'll get into all that. We will also, in the fourth part of the show, so the second half of the NBA starts tonight. Got the Lakers and the Hornets, so kind of a Lakers segment. Give you my thoughts on the Luka trade as well. Obviously it won't be the first game he's playing with the Lakers, but I wanted to give you my thoughts on that as well. And also, it doesn't look like LeBron is going to be playing tonight and for the next couple of games, dealing with his injuries. So just get into all that. And then in the final part of the show, something I was going to talk about on the last show, the football show, but got pushed back a little bit. I wanted to get into Dak Prescott and his comments on the Cowboys and him believing that the Cowboys are close when competing with the Eagles. So I wanted to get into that as well. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about college football. So like I said, the SEC and the Big Ten are meeting to discuss, and both parties seem to be on board with this. Now it's all about getting everybody else to jump on board, and that is expanding the college football playoff even more. So right now, we're at 12-team format, and look, I really enjoyed it this year. Now, some of the games were not great. There were some blowouts, but I thought it was pretty entertaining. And if it wasn't for this new format, Ohio State, who won the national championship, they wouldn't have won the national championship. They would have been out, especially with that loss to Michigan at the end of the year. So I really did enjoy it. But now the SEC and the Big Ten want to take it a bit further and expand it to either a 14 or a 16 team format. And this is how the structure of this new format would be. So the SEC and the Big Ten, the top two teams from each conference would receive automatic berths in the playoff. So for this season, the top two teams were Oregon and Indiana, so they would automatically get in. And then for the SEC, you'd have Texas and Georgia. They would be automatically in. So now you would have teams ranked 3rd through 6th within the conference. They would compete in playing games to determine the additional playoff participants. So for this season, you would have had Penn State versus Illinois, and then Ohio State versus Iowa. And then in the SEC, you would have Tennessee versus Alabama and Ole Miss versus Missouri. Now, for the other conferences, the ACC and the Big 12, the top team from each conference gains direct entry. But then the teams that are ranked 2nd and 3rd, they would face off for additional spots. So SMU, they won the ACC this year, so they would get in automatically. But then you would have Clemson versus Miami for another berth. And then in the Big 12, Arizona State, they would have got in. So it would have been BYU versus Iowa State for another berth. And then you would have one spot that is geared towards the group of 5. So that would have been Boise State this year out of the Mountain West. And then there's the at-large spot, which basically would be reserved for Notre Dame because they're an independent team. And but they would have to rank within the top 14. Now, this would basically take out the committee because the committee decides most of this, or pretty much all of this, the seedings and all that. Basically, how they would determine, I guess, the matchups, the rankings, or the seedings, it would basically be off of their rankings. So they would base their ranking, they would base how the playoffs are set up on the rankings that the committee puts out. Yeah, so this format reduces subjective decisions as teams earn spots based on conference performance and rankings. Now, the potential drawbacks to this, teams could theoretically lose all non-conference games, yet they still make the playoffs by excelling in their own conference. And scenarios like a 6-way tie for 4th place in the SEC can complicate playoff determinations. Now, if they want to do a 16-team format, this would allow automatic bids for champions of all major conferences, including the newly restructured Pac-12 and American Athletic Conference, or permit the Big 12 and ACC to have 3 teams each. So I think with the 6-team format, like you would still have buys, I think with the 14-team format, but with 16 teams, you'd have no buys. So everybody's playing at the same time, basically. Whereas, you look at the 12-team format, you had, the 4 teams that were on bye. You had 4 teams that were on the bye. And I think pretty much all of them lost, right? Because Oregon lost, Boise State lost. I'm trying to think, who am I missing? I know that, those teams lost, but yeah, the teams that were on the bye were kind of at a disadvantage. Well, actually, let me go back and check on that really quickly. So, yeah, looking at the playoff bracket. So, yeah, we got that. Ohio State. It's not letting me. Oh, wait, here we go. Okay. I don't know why it wasn't letting me. So, yeah, Arizona State had a bye. They lost. Oregon lost. Boise State lost. Notre Dame was the only team that didn't have a bye that won. So I just wanted to go back and look at that. But, you're going to have people that are on board with this new format, but you're also going to have people that are not. And, the SEC and the Big Ten, they have the power to do this right now because they're the top 2 conferences. And, if their demands are not met, right now they could say, all right, well, we're going to do our own thing. So I wanted to get into some quotes from a Yahoo article that I was looking at. So, like I said, there are people that are in favor of this. There are people that are going to be against it. Earlier this week, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips told Yahoo Sports, the ACC has not cemented a position on a format, but there needs to be fairness and access to the championship. It needs to be a true championship, not artificial, not an invitational. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark says his conference has been exploring predictive analysis on what different playoff models would mean for conference participation if applied in the recent history of the postseason. I'll be armed with data. You also have the American Athletic Conference Commissioner weighing in on this. College football is stronger than ever. As the CFB evolves, we have a responsibility as student athletes, the integrity of the game and our fans to build a future that includes expanded access for every conference. Yeah, and by doing this new format, you're kind of preventing some of these other conferences from, representing in the playoffs because, you're giving the SEC and the Big Ten these playoff spots, but that lessens the chance of some of these other teams to get in. But like I said, the SEC and the Big Ten right now, they are the top 2 conferences. So they feel like, hey, we're the best of the best. We deserve as much representation as we can. So I do get that. But, and the other thing too is more playoff games, more money. Everybody's happy with that. You could also say that too. So I do get it from both sides. Because, if they were to wait any longer, I mean, college football is trying to level the playing field. So some of these lesser conferences, they have a better fighting chance against some of these bigger schools with all the changes that have happened over the years. But, if they're able to do this now, like I said, you're not going to be able to have these schools, some of these lesser schools, if they, have good seasons and they deserve to be in, but they can't because there's limited spots. That's not right from that perspective. But it is interesting. Now, I believe this will go into effect after next season. But we got to see if people, the other conferences, they agree to it. So it is interesting because I know this is, I definitely feel like I did a similar topic on this on the football show because I remember talking about this in our production meeting as well, that the Big Ten and the SEC were planning on leaving the rest of college football. But we'll have to see how it all plays out. But let me know what you guys think. I hope I explained that as best as I could. We were provided information on this, so I wanted to use it because it was well organized. But let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. How do you feel about a change in the playoff format? Let me know in the comments. I liked the playoff format the way it was this year, if I'm going to be honest. But, hey, more games. I mean, a lot of people are going to say yes to that. But we'll have to wait and see how it goes. So we are going to take our first break. When we come back, we will talk about the NFL and how Netflix is trying to, bid on maybe getting the Sunday afternoon package. So we'll talk about that when we come back from our next break. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Podcast.